Pogue is a husband, an attorney, a former television meteorologist, and now he wants to be the next Charleston County Solicitor. I speak exclusively with Ben for this edition of Quintin's Close-Ups. And if you haven't already, subscribe to my YouTube channel and download my free Quintin's Close-Ups app in your Apple or Google Play stores. Ben Pogue, welcome back to Quintin's Close-Ups.
Yes, always good to see you. Yeah. Can we shake hands with the coronavirus?
Yeah, I'm not worried about that.
I've got, hand sanitizer.
My mom gave me something. I'm like, I don't want it.
Yeah. It's good to see you.
Likewise.
Yeah, things are different now than from the last time. I know you talked to Nina fairly recently.
Right.
Yeah, I'm her biggest fan, and she's doing just wonderful things.
Yes.
I'm really excited about what she's doing too.
And I know you have some great things going on as well. Obviously,
We're trying.
Yeah, you're a husband. You're an attorney, former TV meteorologist.
Parent of 3 kids in college.
Ooh. Wow.
Yeah.
What is it like to be you these days?
It's interesting. We're trying to do good work. You and I know each other enough from back in the day that we sort of share some of those common values where we're driven by what needs to happen in our community. How can we contribute? Yeah. So as you know, I'm running for solicitor of the Ninth Circuit, which is Berkeley and Charleston County. And really that came out of a couple of different passions of mine. First, finding what I can do in my community to help. But also something that I hadn't really shared for years and years. Was one of the reasons I didn't get into criminal law initially. I am a person who experienced crime about 25 years ago, held up at gunpoint, and it happens to more people than you would know. So looking at our landscape, and unfortunately, some incidents that we've had over the past few years with an officer shooting that gets national attention. One of the things that we have seen, besides a rise in homicides, 2019 was the worst year of the decade for homicides in the Tri-County area, was really this disconnect between the community and the criminal justice system. I believe in our criminal justice system. We have the greatest justice system in the world, but it doesn't work when there is this huge disconnect between the community and law enforcement and the criminal justice system. And the elected official who is most responsible for having a real criminal justice policy that reduces crime is the solicitor. We haven't had a general election for the solicitor, not a meaningful one with a Republican and a Democrat, in 20 years. And when you don't have that, you don't have that accountability to the community, and mistrust develops, and then crime goes up, and we don't understand even the root causes of crime. And that's a situation that, from the victim standpoint, I want to fix. And a lot of the victims who I've spoken to, whether they're victims of crimes similar to mine, homicide victims, domestic violence victims, they're left with a couple of questions. And one of those questions that compels individuals, once they've experienced crime, is why? Why did this happen to me? And how do we make sure that it doesn't happen to somebody else? You don't get those answers unless you gather the data and have a real criminal justice policy that is accountable to the community. And that's really what I'm trying to do.
You talk about that data, you talk about homicides in 2019. When you look at the statistics for homicides in Charleston and Berkeley in 2018, what do you say?
Well, I mean, it's not just any particular year. Unfortunately, North Charleston has been one of the worst areas. I believe a couple of years ago, it was top 25, top 30 in the nation. Now, we've made some changes, and Reggie Burgess, I'm a big fan of what he's doing over in North Charleston. I work with a group called RECAP, Rebuilding Every Community Around Peace, which is a group of individuals, Republicans, Democrats, white, black, people who are really interested in their community, and police officers walking through some of the most crime-ridden neighborhoods and coming in with this presence of peace and with the idea that when we minister to people in need and connect with them, we understand what they are going through and what they need. Well, that's a big part of the equation that has been missing from criminal justice policy. And that in itself, as much as anything else, that's data. Data in terms of information that gives us insight to the root causes of crime. If we are going to fix crime, if we are going to really reduce crime rates, save us all a bunch of taxpayer money, produce better individuals, more safe environments, safer kids, and safer neighborhoods, we've got to understand those root causes and address them.
What are the other root causes, Ben?
Well, it's interesting, Quintin. Before I got into this race, I was really more involved in the peripheral. And when I say the peripheral, issues like adult literacy, child literacy, I'm on a couple of boards that deal with that, domestic violence issues, transportation. I work with a grassroots organization that advocates for transportation solutions, and education as well. I'm the child of a parent and the grandchild of a parent and my mother-in-law, or I should say of an educator. So my mom, my grandmother, and my mother-in-law, that's a better way of saying it, all teachers. But when we look at the ramifications of a lack of transportation and transportation resources, a lack of economic opportunity, a lack of educational resources that really benefit a child, a lack of good housing options that are consistent and stable, all those things add up to neighborhoods that have been historically segregated neighborhoods being without the resources that they need. And unfortunately, criminals around the area, they know that. They prey on some of those areas. They use those areas even to recruit young kids. I was talking to a teenager recently, and he said, look, there are 7, 8, 9-year-olds in my neighborhood. Their parents are working 2 jobs. They don't have good transportation, so the parents can't be there for the kids all the time. Well, guess what? The criminals are recruiting those kids at 7, 8, and 9. We got to keep these kids safe. And we're not going to be able to do it unless we understand that transportation, education, healthcare, all those kinds of things go into resource starvation of some of those neighborhoods where the crime rates are highest.
Where are those areas right now in 2020?
North Charleston is a big one, but they're really all over. And this is the bad part. For everybody, no matter where you live, crime is either not that far away or it can spill over into your neighborhood. And that's really the reason that we need a comprehensive policy. So this is up in Berkeley County. It's Monk's Corner, Goose Creek, Hanahan, but James Island, Johns Island, Mount Pleasant, anywhere you go, that element is there. There's criminal activity. We've got to make sure that it's not a thriving and self-perpetuating criminal economy, which unfortunately we're seeing in some areas. North Charleston, parts of North Charleston are some of the worst, but they're easy places to find because we all know where there are not consistent public transportation routes. We all know where the schools aren't the best. We all know where the housing situations aren't the best. And those areas also happen to be food deserts where there's not a good grocery store to provide fresh, healthy food options to. All those things are in the same places, and it's no coincidence that that's where crime is the worst.
Where is your comprehensive plan for cutting back on crime in Charleston and Berkeley County?
Yeah, and Quintin, this is another reason that I'm running. We have used the same old tactics to try and combat crime over the years. We've used a hammer. And a hammer is a good tool, but when you're building a house, you need more than just that. And if all you have is a hammer, then you start looking to find out where you can use it. Where's the next nail? So we need a new skill set. And this is a big part of why I'm running. The skill that we haven't had is in relationship building. So as you know, we were talking before, most of the time in my office here, I'm doing mediations. Right. And that's all about bringing parties together, bringing people together who are at odds and finding areas where we can create a solution together. We don't say compromise because that's not really what it's about. It's about finding where our values connect. And part and parcel of building a relationship is rebuilding trust. There's one interesting thing over the last several years. We've seen the time that people are in jail awaiting trial increase by nearly 2 times, by nearly 100% over the last 5 or 6 years. That's a symptom of a lack of trust in our criminal justice system. When lawyers on both sides trust each other, when the public trusts the system, then you don't get all the delays that cause somebody to be in jail before they have even been tried for that crime. That is a glaring neon sign to us that the thing we need most in terms of reforming our criminal justice system and ultimately lowering the crime rate, it's reestablishing trust. It's It's rehabilitating dysfunctional relationships between law enforcement and community members, between the solicitor's office and the public defender's office, the solicitor's office and law enforcement. We've got to build the trust and get rid of toxic relationships, or else none of this is going to be fixed. That's what I do. That's what we need right now.
And obviously, for many, many years, you're a television meteorologist on television here.
Yeah.
How will you use those communication skills to bridge the gap between the solicitor's office and the community?
Well, there's a reason that that I'm a mediator. I started out my law career as a trial lawyer, which is a lot about convincing juries,
Right.
About what your perspective is and helping them internalize what that perspective is. But that's really one-sided. Trial is a battle, and when I'm in trial, I'm trying to win. But that's not always the best solution. So what we really need when we want people to come together are those same communication skills that really involve sharing a perspective from someone else and then understanding and listening to what the other person's perspective is and seeing how we can integrate those things and find areas where we connect on. It is so frequent that I'm in a mediation and one party says, well, you tell them this. And that's not going to get us to where we need to go. So a lot of that healing of that broken relationship, obviously, is saying, why is that important to you? Let's figure this out. And a lot of times at the root of somebody's reaction that says, you tell them this, is a deep core value that is just simply misunderstood by who they perceive as the opposition. When we bring people together and use those communication skills to sort of like doing a news story, listening to what the important facts are so you can really get to the core issues. When we do those kinds of things, people are so much more readily brought together in a really positive way that allows them to move forward.
And you also said this too, quote, we do this by bringing it back to the people. We need a solicitor who will listen, who will accept responsibility and be accountable to our neighborhoods. What are you listening to right now for the constituents?
Well, part of it is you got to listen to the community, listen to constituents in their environment. It doesn't do us any good to stand up at a podium, and we've seen this far too often, and speak down to people. That's not what we need. That's not how you get the answers and the data from them. So part of it is being at community meetings, being at neighborhood meetings, sitting and listening, not telling people what you think. But it's talking to people when you're walking down the street in Chicora, Cherokee at 8 o'clock at night on a Thursday night or on a Friday night and seeing what people are up to and listening to them. And what we hear consistently are that folks don't trust that they have got a realistic path to success. And I've talked about an occasion I had to speak with one mom who she just felt like such a failure herself because she had lost faith in the system. And she was sort of struggling with how she maintained the faith to be able to teach her child that there was a real path to success when she's got 2 jobs, really 2.5 for her, when she doesn't have the time to spend with her child. She doesn't have the time even to necessarily get them to church on Sunday, which is a huge part of the equation. And she doesn't trust that if she put forth even more effort where she doesn't have time in the day to do that, then it would result in her child having a realistic path to success anyway. They're not in a good school. They're in a difficult neighborhood. They're in a tenuous housing situation. They just don't have the resources that a lot of folks have. And unfortunately, those are the people who have had inequitable results in our criminal justice system.
And if you become solicitor, what particular community programs would you bring to the office?
Well, there are a couple things we need to do that folks are doing all around the country. I'm not the only one coming up with these ideas, but I mean, they are sort of intertwined with my skill set. And they're not policy initiatives, at least initially, that you might think about. But one of them is making sure that every single prosecutor, every attorney on the solicitor's staff, there are about 40 of those attorneys in Berkeley and Charleston County combined, number one, goes to 4 community meetings a year. So that can be walking through communities, going to the neighborhood meeting in Chicora, Cherokee, or wherever you live in Mount Pleasant, or wherever you are in James Island, Johns Island, Monk's Corner, wherever. But go and listen 4 times a year. That's only once a quarter. and understand what the community is like, what they think the problems are, and how we can fix them and address them from a criminal justice standpoint. Another part is having solicitors or having prosecutors go on ride-alongs with cops. The cops, like I mentioned, Reggie Burgess and Luther Reynolds doing a whole lot of work. But we do have a disconnect in terms of the prosecutorial staff really understanding what the cops are going through, what their challenges are. And that's part of the equation too. We got to make sure that we understand the other side's perspective so that we don't default to, blaming somebody else, or give ourselves the out of not taking the responsibility when there is something that we need to do. So those are two things. But all of that is part and parcel of getting the data from the community, developing relationships with the community, and ultimately what we need to do is make sure that we've got an attorney staff in Charleston and Berkeley County that reflects the community. We don't have that, not in terms of the diversity that we've got. And the Ninth Circuit is roughly 30% African American. We haven't had more than one or two African American attorneys among 40 people in that office. And that's something we got to remedy immediately.
And when you look at the data, what else are you looking at right now?
It's not just criminal justice data. It's looking at and hearing from the community where they think the holes in the system are. How often are the bus routes running? How reliable are they? Let's look at the education data in terms of I was talking to some teachers about this the other day, what their students' behaviors are like, what their students' parental resources are like. And a lot of kids have a parent in jail. Are we taking that into consideration when we are putting somebody in jail, a criminal in jail, for a long period of time? How long their kids are going to be without a parent? And is there something we can do there? How does that manifest itself in terms of behavioral issues that develop in the classroom? What is the data as far as graduation rates? What is the data as far as the rates of literacy for our kids? And being an organization that supports early childhood literacy, we know that the data there is saying we have a huge gap to fill. And ultimately, those kids who don't learn to read in an early age, they are much more apt to engage and be recruited by criminals, engage in criminal behavior, and be recruited by criminals later on. The bad guys know where they are, and they're going after those kids who don't have the resources.
What would you do on day one if you become solicitor?
There's so much to do. There's so much to do. But first of all, invite the community in. We also haven't had the transparency that we need. When a new transparency initiative comes out, but you still can't really look up everybody who you need to, and that's what we've got right now. And that transparency initiative hadn't really taken place for the first 12 years that somebody was in office. There's a mistrust there. So the first thing we do on day one is invite those community leaders into the office itself, bring them through the process, show them what we're going through. Now, they may have a lot of criticisms, but Quintin, a lot of those criticisms are warranted. And we've got to listen to what the folks want and what the folks need, and see if there are ways we can help the public understand that we are doing some things that are right. And then let's find out where we can mesh our values, where we can have new policies that really result in a drop in crime and an increase in trust. That's a lot. I know I'm overwhelmed.
Oh, no.
I'm taking up too much time.
No, you're fine. I got to ask this difficult question.
Yeah, ask difficult questions.
What good has Scholar Wilson done in the solicitor's office in your mind?
That's something that I think our political candidates across the board need to ask more often. Some of this is a mediator's mindset, but I think that we need to focus on the positives of our colleagues who are on the other side of a race. And I try not to use the word opponent, but we are opponents in a political sense, but we're also colleagues, and we need to understand that when we are going to all be part of the community that we want to move forward, then you got to find good things about the other person. And I look at Solicitor Wilson and I see a person of intention, an individual of service and dedication to her community. And I think somebody who's tried to do some of the right things. The recent Transparent Initiative, that's a step in the right direction. I think that although I think it occurred far too late, at least some discussions about maybe doing an internal audit are that's a good thing, and I think she is intentional about wanting to find out the degree to which there is implicit bias and, frankly, institutional racism, which is something that we need to say by name in our criminal justice system. I would like those things to happen faster, but they don't happen at all unless you have a well-intentioned person in there, and I think that they need to happen quicker, and I think that they need a different skill set, which is why I'm running. But I admire her service and dedication and her intention to do the right thing. I think she's a good individual.
And how do you define institutional racism within the criminal justice system?
I mean, this goes back a very, very long way. We've had this as a big part of our history. But it did get worse in the 1970s. We actually had, in many respects, a better criminal justice system and a better prison system in the 50s and 60s. And when we get into the 70s, 80s, and 90s, we had a couple things. First of all, a drug war that had different kinds of sentences for basically the same thing. We noticed it most definitively in the difference between powder cocaine and crack cocaine, where the people in the justice system knew that poorer people, primarily people of color, were more apt to use crack cocaine, and the sentences were just unconscionably higher. That meant putting a lot of people who were African Americans and who were poor in the justice system, making a lot of their misdemeanors felonies. We've seen that in state legislatures across the country, sort of ramping up the sentences. The proliferation of mandatory minimum sentences, the proliferation in the 70s, 80s, and 90s of charging juveniles as adults and almost always having a felony attached to some portion of their charges so that you could use that as leverage to get somebody to plead for something else. That's not ethical charging. So all those add up to a mass incarceration culture, which really was peaking in the late 90s and early 2000s. But we've known that there are problems there that needed to be reversed since the 1990s and 2000s, and we're getting around to those solutions too late. We need to elect officials who we know are dedicated to implementing those changes immediately.
How ethical has this office been so far?
I don't really want to comment on that too much. I'm not there, so I don't know the challenges that somebody has. What I believe is that there are better things that we can do. And it's not always someone's ethics that put them in a position of charging as many charges as they can for an individual and ramping it up to find some enhancement to make an offense a felony. A lot of that is what is the mindset of the entire institution. That's why it's really institutional racism, because it sort of feeds off of itself. Feeds off of a long history of the last 40 years of policies that were inequitable. So when somebody comes from that entire environment and that mindset, and it's always been done like that, it's always been, we charge to the max, even when we're not quite sure if those charges are right, then that's sort of what you do. And when we don't have elections, Quintin, general elections that really engage the community, then you don't get the accountability. And there's nothing to prompt a solicitor or any elected official in any jurisdiction to really look and introspect at oneself and say, am I serving the community? Am I doing my duty? Yes, am I maintaining the order that we need? Am I keeping people safe? But also, are there things I could do better? Like I said, we're all fallible. I'm as fallible in God's eyes as anyone else. And we need to be forgiving to a certain extent too. So I'd rather look forward at what can be done, what needs to be done, and hopefully what skill set I have that can accomplish that.
How long will it take you to take politics out of the solicitor's office?
Well, politics internal politics I'm not okay with in the solicitor's office. And I don't think anybody should be. But it is a political position. It's a partisan position. It's a position where we're in a Democratic district and we haven't had a Democratic candidate for solicitor forever. But in terms of what the policies are, in terms of creating those relationships, that's absolutely nonpartisan. We see that on our recap walks, that it's absolutely nonpartisan. It's not about anything except connecting with folks and keeping them safe. There's no partisan element to making sure that our kids are safe. There's no partisan element to making sure our neighborhoods are successful. There's no partisan element to making sure that we're not overtaxing ourselves and putting money to waste in a criminal justice system that's not driving down the crime rate. Those are things that are across the board valued by us all. And that's what we need to focus on.
And talk to me about diversity. How diversified will your office be?
Well, the goal is to mirror our community. I mean, that's really what it should be. So 30% of our Ninth Circuit is African American. Some of that is Hispanic as well. And I think that we need to engage the Hispanic Latinx community a little bit more. I'm literally continuing to work on my Spanish to help do some of that.
Okay.
But we need to have folks who represent all those communities and who can relate to some of the challenges that are ethnic challenges that not everybody understands in that office. You know, we can't do criminal justice in a community if we don't reflect that community.
Benjamin Pogue, thank you so much for your time. And again, welcome back to Quintin's Close-Ups.
Thanks, Quintin.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yes, sir.